They thought they were in control. Two officers pulling over a lone driver ready to throw their weight around. But what they didn't know was that the woman behind the wheel wasn't just any driver. She was their new boss, the chief of police. And this stop was about to change everything. Daniela Monroe had always been a woman of quiet strength, someone who understood the resilience it took to rise above adversity. After years of relentless hard work, today marked the beginning of a new chapter, her first day as the chief of police in the bustling city of Ridgewater. This wasn't just an accomplishment, it was a milestone, a culmination of decades of struggle, endurance, and defiance against the odds. It wasn't lost on Daniela how monumental this moment was, not just for her, but for those who saw her as a beacon of hope. Ridgewater had a reputation, one Daniela knew all too well. Its police department was notorious for its deeply ingrained biases, and the community had grown weary of promises of change that never materialized. Daniela had heard the whispers of discontent from officers when her appointment was announced. The idea of a black woman leading the department unsettled many, exposing their prejudice like a raw nerve. But Daniela wasn't here to win a popularity contest. She had a job to do, and she intended to do it well. Driving down the winding highway that led into the heart of Ridgewater, Daniela took in the early morning sun as it painted the horizon in soft hues of gold and pink. Her hands gripped the steering wheel just a bit tighter than usual. This day was supposed to be a celebration of her journey, but an uneasy feeling clung to her, heavy and unshakable. Ridgewater wasn't just any city, and this wasn't just any police department. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden flash of blue and red lights in her rearview mirror. A patrol car pulled up behind her, its sirens blaring. Instinctively, Daniela's chest tightened, her heartbeat quickening. She knew this wasn't a random stop. She pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching beneath her tires. Two officers emerged from the patrol car. Both were white. The senior officer, a burly man in his late 40s with a hardened expression, approached her car with a slow, deliberate stride. The younger officer trailed behind him, his face a mask of skepticism, his hand resting a little too casually on his holstered weapon. Daniela rolled down her window, her face composed, though her pulse raced. The senior officer leaned slightly into the window, his eyes scanning the interior of her vehicle with a practiced air of authority. "License and registration," he said flatly, his tone clipped and devoid of warmth. Daniela calmly reached into her glove compartment, retrieving the requested documents. Without a word, she handed them over. The senior officer studied her license for a moment, his brows furrowing slightly. Meanwhile, the younger officer stepped closer to the car, his suspicion evident. "What brings you out here?" he asked, his tone laced with condescension. "This stretch of road isn't exactly safe, if you catch my drift." The insinuation wasn't lost on Daniela, but she kept her face neutral. "I'm on my way to work," she said evenly. "And where exactly would that be?" The younger officer pressed, his smirk suggesting he thought he already knew the answer. Daniela hesitated, considering her options. She could reveal her identity right then and there, ending the encounter before it escalated further. But something told her to wait. She had been in situations like this too many times before. The power dynamic was clear, and she didn't want her first day to be marred by unnecessary conflict. "You'll find out soon enough," she replied calmly, meeting the younger officer's gaze with a steady, unflinching look. The senior officer, sensing that the interaction was veering toward confrontation, interjected. "Let's not make this difficult, ma'am," he said, his tone carrying a thinly veiled threat. "We can take this further if necessary." Daniela felt her patience wearing thin. She had spent her entire career enduring this kind of treatment. Disrespect, condescension, assumptions based solely on her appearance. She had worked too hard and climbed too high to let this slide. Taking a steadying breath, she decided it was time to end the charade. "That won't be necessary," she said firmly. "I'm Chief Daniela Monroe. I suggest you reconsider how you're handling this situation." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Both officers froze, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. The senior officer blinked, his mouth opening and closing as he processed her words. The younger officer's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panic. "You're the chief?" the senior officer stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Daniela replied, her tone steady and authoritative. And I'd like to know why I was stopped and subjected to this line of questioning. For a moment, neither officer spoke. The younger one fumbled for words, clearly scrambling to come up with an excuse, but it was too late. The power dynamic had shifted, and they both knew it. The senior officer cleared his throat, his face pale. There must have been some kind of misunderstanding, yeah, he said weakly. No, Daniela said sharply. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is exactly the problem. You stop people like me without cause, make assumptions, and flex your authority because you think you can get away with it. The senior officer opened his mouth to protest, but Daniela held up a hand to silence him. She stepped out of the car, her posture commanding as she addressed them. You'll be reporting to me directly for the next few weeks, she said. I'll be reviewing every traffic stop you make, and I suggest you think carefully about how you conduct yourselves moving forward. The younger officer nodded quickly, his face flushed with embarrassment. The senior officer muttered an apology, though his tone lacked sincerity. Daniela didn't bother responding. She returned to her car and drove away, her grip on the steering wheel tightening as she processed the encounter. It was a stark reminder of the work that lay ahead. Later that morning, Daniela stood in front of her new team for the first time. The Ridgewater Police Department's briefing room was filled with officers, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and outright hostility. Daniela didn't need to be a mind reader to know what many of them were thinking. She had heard the whispers, the thinly veiled comments about how she didn't belong here. But Daniela wasn't here to win their approval. She was here to lead. She recounted the events of that morning, leaving no detail unspoken. I'm not here to embarrass anyone, she began, her voice steady and measured. But I am here to make it clear that this kind of behavior stops now. The room was silent, the tension palpable. Every officer in this department will be held accountable for how they treat the citizens of Ridgewater, regardless of their race, gender, or background. A murmur of unease rippled through the room. But Daniela didn't flinch. She had spent her entire career fighting for justice, and she wasn't about to stop now. This is your chance to prove that you are the kind of officers who serve with integrity, she continued. But know this, I will not tolerate bias. I will not tolerate disrespect, and I will not tolerate anyone who thinks they are above the law. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Some officers shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded in quiet agreement. Daniela could tell who was willing to stand with her and who wasn't. But that didn't matter. She was ready for the battles ahead. Over the next few weeks, word of Daniela's encounter spread throughout the department and the community. For some, it was a sign that real change was finally coming. For others, it was a wake-up call. The media picked up the story, and Daniela quickly became a symbol of hope for a city desperate for reform. But she knew this was only the beginning. Every decision she made, every policy she implemented, would be scrutinized. The road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, but Daniela was ready. She hadn't fought this hard, sacrificed this much, to falter now. Ridgewater needed change, and Daniela was determined to be the catalyst. The fight for justice was far from over, but as she drove through the city she now called home, Daniela knew one thing for certain: she was exactly where she needed to be.